Okay, Godfrey. So first of all, great talking to you. It's always nice to have a classic liberal, a self-thinking individual, well-educated, with sound values, and heavily political incorrect. Hard to find these days. So always a pleasure talking to you. Let me shoot, the first question. When I read the mass media, and in particular when it comes to the United Kingdom, the official narrative is always that Brexit is responsible for the bad shape of the UK economy. This is what I can see when it comes to the mainstream news. So everything is blamed on Brexit. That's why it's going that bad. What is your take on this?
Well, there's a couple of things there. We're not doing the United Kingdom economy is in no worse shape than anybody else's, and we're in better shape than Germany. Have brought all this on, of course, on themselves. So first of all, it isn't so that the British economy is doing any better or any worse than anybody else. So that's point one. And point two really is Brexit. Well, of course, we haven't had Brexit. What we had was a referendum. We voted as a nation in this referendum to leave the European Union, and we therefore withdrew our commissioners and our members of the European Parliament. But we haven't left in any other way. We haven't rolled back any of the thousands and thousands of pieces of legislation which were imposed on us since the early 1970s. And the whole idea of this was to roll back the state. It was to roll back the state to give the United Kingdom an opportunity to break away from the stifling control of the European Union. And that involved getting rid, deregulation, a major situation, deregulation, and of course, very significant tax reform. That was the idea, so that we could then go into the global marketplace unfettered with regulation and tax, which is the burden, of course, of all everything in the European Union, and the increasing burden in the Anglosphere, North America and Australasia. This is one of the problems. And the reason, of course, the BRICS countries are forging ahead is because they are not stifled with this centralized regulation. And of course, their overall tax stake is significantly less. So that is the situation as it stands. Nothing to do with the economy, nothing to do with Brexit at all. It's just that we stood still since 2016 when we should have moved forward. And the reason for that is we have an entire civil service which is Europhile. They wanted to stay in the European Union. They are blocking any sort of reform, but it's not just the civil service. It's the House of Commons was overwhelmingly Europhile, and the House of Lords, of course, our amending chamber was Europhile. So we have the whole concept of what the Americans call deep state, didn't want us to leave and don't want us to make a success of it. Okay. So we've got the dead hand of deep state on it. And of course, you will probably know, and I'm not a great one, and neither are you, I know, for judging an economy on the basis of GDP. It's a poor measure. But if we use GDP just for this exercise, nearly 50% of GDP in the United Kingdom is the public sector. Now, if you were to take also, perhaps you could add to that, companies or the part of the wealth creating sector, which is beholden to the state, it's probably more. But even if we agree that it's 50% is the state, it means that the wealth creating sector is under devastating pressure. We can't all be civil servants. Sooner or later, the wealth creating sector has to make enough money for the state to tax it, to pay for the social benefits that are perceived by the British electorate. Of course, you and I know they're not, because the state squanders money, wastes money, and is fundamentally corrupt. But this is what the man on the famous Clapham omnibus thinks. that you have to have tax if you want these wonderful things like pension, state education, and state health, all of which, of course, as we know, are failing. Yeah. But of course, what we can't do is we can't have the whole country. Otherwise, we're turning into the Soviet Union, where, of course, we pretend to work and they pretend to pay us. And we're heading down that, and we're not alone. We're not alone in that, of course. Most of Europe's in that situation, certainly Western Europe. And of course, we know that North America is drifting in that way. And I think if anybody comes with a new investment portfolio system of bricks, and if you want to go into equities, and I wouldn't recommend equities at this stage of the cycle, but if you want to go into equities, and if we see a global fallback in equities, I would certainly start contributing in part, in some small measure, to a BRICS equity fund, which are free of the nonsense that we're having to put up with in the West.
Okay. Yeah, I think we're talking about the Soviet Union and the deep state. I mean, when it comes to Britain, I mean, you have a very specific think tank, which has been founded in, I think, 1880. It's called the Fabian Society. It has been also founding the London School of Economics. I think it had a lot of impact by founding the today's Labour Party. As far as I remember, I think Tony Blair and also Gordon Brown were members of the Fabian Society. I mean, what we can say, it's basically hardcore communist, Marxist, socialist. Can you, I mean, are the British people aware? I mean, 50% of the MEPs, as far as I know, used to be members of the Fabian Society. So, I mean, if you have those kind in politics, you know, these kind of people, what can you expect, you know, from your politicians and government servants? Or how strong is still, you know, the impact or the influence of this Fabian Society on today's climate? What do you think?
Well, certainly what you say is true. That there's no question. However, I think it's slightly simplistic insofar as this situation where, you know, the Fabian Society, it's left, is the left-right dynamic still relevant? You know, left wing, right wing, so on and so forth. I'm not altogether sure that these days that is relevant. But if you think about who runs the country, our country, and who runs Europe, and now who runs North America, the Democrats, if you will, we have this situation. Socialism, or a form of socialism, is very attractive to bureaucrats and politicians because it puts them in control of everything. And so they want to be in control of everything. And so is it Fabian? Is it socialism? Is it communism? It's raw. I would argue it's more statism, that the state, and there are many fake conservative politicians in the United Kingdom who'll be horrified if you call them socialists, but they are socialists, but they haven't really examined their own conscience. So we have a fake Conservative Party, which we have a fake electoral system. So you either vote for the Conservative Party, you vote blue, which are fundamentally neo-socialist, or you vote red, which are slightly more fundamental socialist, but it's socialist all the same. It's the same, of course, these days in America. You vote red or you vote blue, you vote Democrat or you vote Republican. The colors are back to front, the red and blues are back to front, but the principle is the same. There really isn't very much difference now between the average Republican on the Hill and the average Democrat. They're all the same: warfare, welfare, regulation, high spenders, as we've seen the increase in the debt ceiling recently, all these things. So yes, the problem is, and it's becoming more embedded, you go back to the Fabian Society's foundation in the late 19th century, which is interesting, where, if you will, socialism, or a form of socialism, was the bright new future. And it was an understandable concept, you know, at that time. It was a creature of its time, as the same was in religion, Methodism and Wesleyanism. It was a kickback against the Anglican and the Catholic Church. People wanted a bigger say, a bigger share, and that looked like it was going to be the possible answer. And of course, we know that it wasn't, any more than the Russian Revolution delivered anything for the proletariat. It is that as soon as people get into power, They feather their own nests. And of course, the other problem that you have when it comes to politicians is that they are extremely low-grade people. And it wasn't until I went into politics late in life I realized I worked for a very sharp investment bank in the city, and everybody was extremely clever and extremely sharp. It was only when I moved into politics I realized how badly educated these people are, and how narrow-minded they are, and how interested they are in their own personal welfare. And there aren't many conviction politicians. And the universities in Great Britain now, and this is certainly true of America, and probably true of most of Western Europe, they do not want critical thinking. They don't want critical thinking, and they don't want risk assessment. So grasshoppering about a little bit, one of the problems that we've had in the last 20 years or 30 years when it comes to the medical profession, who let this COVID scam roll forward. They've let the big pharma take control. Most doctors in the United Kingdom and Western Europe, and I suspect North America, have abandoned the Hippocratic Oath.
Yeah.
This isn't because they're inherently bad people. This is because they have no concept of critical thinking or risk analysis. And so, as one graduate from a university, a young man said to me the other day, the medical students were the worst. It's a memory game.
Yeah.
The medical undergraduates just play a memory game. They're there for 5 years. They keep their nose clean. They write what they're told to write, what they're told to think, and they go into a state health system which brooks no dissent. And if you dissent, you will lose your license to practice.
Yeah.
So they haven't even bothered to fight back or push back. So this is one of the problems, and that's just the medical profession. It's the same in the military profession, which I spent a small period of time in now. You can't be promoted over 1-star rank in the United Kingdom unless you're politically correct. It's a political appointment. And of course, it's exactly the same in the United States of America. You can't get above the rank of full colonel unless you're politically okay with all the stuff of the time, transgender, homosexuality, it doesn't matter. All these things are encompassed, and dissent is not allowed. And you'll finish your career at colonel in NATO if you don't buy into this. And of course, it's created all its own problems in the military. So it's health, military, education. It's the same thing now. No dissent is allowed to the theory of man-made global climate change. No dissent. So the children are coming home now, 7 or 8 years old, telling mum and dad that there's no future for the planet. We're all going to boil to death. The teachers are very low grade. The teaching profession in the United Kingdom, I can't speak for everyone else, although I know it to be true of America, are extremely poor grade people. These people are losers. These people went into teaching in the state system because they're not capable of working in the wealth creating sector. They don't have enough to offer. And of course, if you add the unsackability, the index-linked pensions, and the massive amount of leave they get, it's money for old rope. And so the whole country, the whole Anglosphere, the whole of Western Europe is bound, joined with hoops of steel. Your future is with the state and not in dissent. And of course, we know that this will finish, because if it can't go on, it won't go on. You can't run society on that basis. But I think it's got to get worse before it gets better.
Absolutely. And I think they really achieved, their long march through the institutions, all those neo-Marxists. Now they are sitting, in university and in politics and in media, and in government positions, and propagating these false ideas, which we basically always said, if you're 20 and you're not a socialist, you have no heart. But if you're 30 and you're still a socialist, you have no brain. And yes, that's basically still
there's another, as far as the state is concerned, once they get to these points of influence, it's rather coarse, forgive me, but it's the working class can kiss my ass. I've got the foreman's job at last.
Yeah. Let's talk about inflation quickly. Inflation is on the rise all over the world. And we both know it's not an act of God. Can you elaborate a bit? You know, who is responsible for inflation? Can you explain the audience who is really the pushing factor behind inflation?
Monetary inflation is caused and can only be caused by governments who have their control over the printing of money. And they do this in various forms, but generally speaking, by control of the central banks. And this business about the central banks being independent, of course, is ludicrous. The governor of the Bank of England is selected quite deliberately by the political class. And again, dissent is not allowed. And so if you create an inflated money supply, you get monetary inflation. And of course, monetary inflation will eventually find inflation in price inflation, because there's too much money chasing the system. So this is the problem that we have. So this sort of feeling that the politicians put out, this sort of spin that politicians put out, that it's like a tsunami. There's nothing you can do about it. It's an act of God. And this is endorsed by mainstream media, including the so-called financial journalists, of which there aren't any. Not really. Not that you and I would consider financial journalists. One or two, maybe Liam Halligan and one or two others. But they're very, very few. And so you have this problem of too much money. The government is spending far too much money, and they're spending more than they can possibly earn in revenue, so they borrow. And so it took a long time for it to come onto the high street. It was asset price inflation, of course, which went up. And of course, as I suspect your followers and my followers will be relatively familiar with the Cantillon effect. If you're at the beginning of the queue, if you're at the front of the queue, and there's an expansion of the money supply, and you pick up on that money supply and you have assets, the asset prices inflate. And of course, the biggest one we have in this country is domestic property, residential property, and that has gone through. So people have a feeling of wealth. And we have an also interesting situation where people are very pleased, and the government's very pleased that house property prices are going up because people feel comfortable with the regime. Nobody goes to the barricades if they've got an expensive house and they've made a profit. They think they've made a profit on their house, but they don't apply the same criteria to a loaf of bread, which is a staple diet. You would think your food basket, now that's considered, 10 or 15% inflation in the price of your food is a bad thing. But the roof over your head, inflation is a good thing. It's an extremely weird phenomenon. But of course, all your journalists, all your politicians are steeped in Keynesianism, and your universities and your university professors who believe, and of course they called it the modern monetary theory, wasn't modern at all. Modern monetary theory was Keynesianism on stilts. And so you print it. And of course, it didn't come through to the high street for a while. You and I thought it would come through earlier, and it's taken a bit of time, and it's come through. The dam, if you will, if I may use that expression just at the moment, the dam has burst, and of course it's now flooding into the high street, and there's nothing temporary about it. And of course, the irony is your asset prices will fall because of the same phenomenon. So people will find their food baskets going up and their house prices going down. And of course, all these new houses for which people have borrowed money at very 0% or 1 or 2% their mortgage, and they've borrowed money for the car, and they've got a nice shiny new Range Rover on the drive. And of course, when interest rates go up, they will find their mortgage repayments double, and they can't afford the car. They'll sell the car. The price of cars will fall. Used cars will fall. Price of houses will fall, and the whole thing kicks off its chain. And we've been there before. This isn't a new phenomenon. You know, we've been there before. In this country, we were there in 1974 and 1989. Other countries have their own cycle, and of course, it's a cycle of credit boom and bust. And we are now at the end of the credit cycle. And of course, people don't understand that. And because the press don't understand it, politicians don't understand it, and dare I say, bankers and central bankers don't understand it. I, like you, have lectured at seminars full of very senior bankers, and I watch their little faces stare at me blankly. They have no idea how money works.
I agree.
They don't understand it, and they still think that this is a temporary phenomenon which will go away, and it can't go away until we change the system. And you can't change the system until you go back to hard currency. And I will tell all our listeners, yours and mine, that a loaf of bread in just after the Battle of Waterloo in 1816, which incidentally the French think we still won, but never leaving that aside, in 1816, the price of a loaf of bread was the same in Great Britain as it was in 1913. And that's because we have a gold standard and you can't inflate gold, so you didn't have inflation. Inflation was an unknown phenomenon from 1816 to 1913 because we had gold. You had inflation in early Middle Ages because they degraded the currency with alloy and clipping and so on and so forth. And we know all these things, and this is the problem. So until we get back to hard money and still governments live within their means and stop spending, which they could easily do. I could balance the books in Great Britain overnight by halving, by cutting government spending by 75%, most of which, of course, is squandered and wasted. So you get rid of that and you go back to hard money and real interest rates, which are the time appreciation of money. So people will then go back to saving money instead of living paycheck to paycheck, which of course happens in the Anglosphere, particularly in America. Why would you save money for 0% interest, the bank giving you 0% interest, and inflation is running at 10%? You'd be mad to save money. So we have, as you and I are very familiar with, of course, the crack up boom. So people actually, whatever money they have, they can't wait to get rid of because it's becoming increasingly worthless. And I was in my local Yorkshire town this morning. I've never seen so many Range Rovers, gleaming Range Rovers. And this isn't an expensive part of the world. This isn't London. This is a rural community in East Yorkshire. People are just getting rid of money because there's no point in having money because it's being degraded every month. And that's the crack up boom, and no good will come of it.
So then, if I understand you correctly, you don't believe that inflation is going back, that inflation will rather escalate in the future and will lead to the impoverishment of the people in the UK, because I mean the governments are not going to reduce 75% of the spending or basically fighting all those bureaucrats who don't contribute to, they don't do, I mean basically they are not productive. They are living off tax money. And, and as you said at the beginning, 50% of the GDP is, government driven or government part. I mean, it's just crazy. I mean, so you're thinking inflation is not going back. It will go further out of control. And what would you recommend then to the people? How to protect themselves? Do you have a suggestion, or do you do something for yourself? How to prepare?
It's very difficult because the only people that are going to suffer, who always suffer, are the middle class.
Yeah.
Poor people don't have any money anyway. They're going to suffer from galloping inflation in energy prices and food prices. But the poor will always be with us. The really rich don't pay any tax. The really rich don't care. They're asset rich. They sit on land. They sit on offshore bank accounts, trust funds. The really rich people don't really care very much about this. The people who suffer are the middle class, the professional middle class, who are now in the United Kingdom more highly taxed than they have been since the war. It's absolutely crippling, the amount that the tax burden, and with inflation, all these things will come through. And of course, the tremendous mess we've made of our energy policy will drive our manufacturing base even further away. What a lot of people don't understand is that Great Britain is the 8th biggest manufacturing country in the world. People don't understand that. People don't realize that. English people don't understand that. And it's mainly medium-sized companies, not big companies, medium-sized. We make all sorts of wonderful things, surfing boards, pianos, we do all sorts of wonderful things, and they're exported all over the world. All these things you need energy to produce. And if you can't afford it, then it pushes your manufacturing base abroad, and you have to go, even you don't have to go that far. For example, energy prices are half what they are in Poland. So you could actually halve your energy bills just by going to Poland. You don't necessarily have to go to China, Indochina, or Indonesia or the Indian subcontinent. You don't need to do that. You've only got to just go a little way. And of course, with a political and bureaucratic elite who have never been in business, don't forget, they made a choice at university, the bureaucrats and politicians, not to go into the wealth creating sector. The water was too hot for them. They didn't want to risk being sacked. They didn't want to risk having to be assessed. They didn't want all the things that go with working the wealth creating sector. They wanted the comfort of state, or maybe very big business, like BP or Shell or some of the big companies, which are so close to monitoring or replicating the civil service, it doesn't matter. It's not really wealth creation as you and I would understand it. It's not entrepreneurial. So this is the kind of problem that we have. Is it going to go away? Well, here's another problem. History shows us that when you have a crash, a big crash, social crash, economic crash, which is coming, which we know that, people don't think we had too much government or too much tax or too much regulation. That's not the way they think. They think there wasn't enough, that they should have had more. So the Germans took to the national socialism in the late 1920s. The Russians took to communism, so on and so forth. The reaction is always not libertarianism, sadly, but more control, more government spending, or more control of us. Now, what can they do? What can we do? What can the professional middle class do? Well, certainly, if you have any wealth, if you have some wealth, and this is more likely to be your, let's say, people in your late 50s in the professional class, in the professional middle class, those people have accumulated some wealth. The children have now gone. They've been perhaps successful in their professions. What do they do with their money? Well, most of their money, a lot of their money is already in the property in which they own and which they live. So that's a big slice of their portfolio, if you will. The other places, bonds are dangerous. Bonds are due for a crash. Bonds are already falling. Equities are teetering, so on and so forth. And commercial property, of course, is on the edge of the abyss. Of course, it would be, wouldn't it? Yeah. So the only place you can go to, really, in my view, and that is gold. And you have to have gold. And if you buy it in the form of coin, it's coin of the realm in Great Britain, which means it carries no VAT and it carries no capital gains tax. And if you hold it in specie, of course, and you and I both know, don't hold a piece of paper from a bank or an institution that tells you that they're holding the gold for you, because they're not holding the gold for you. If you don't hold it in your greasy little paw, that coin, you don't own it. Now, that doesn't mean to say that you have to keep it at home. That doesn't mean to say you have to keep it at home, but you don't let the state near it. So if it's a deposit box, it's an independent deposit box and nobody knows what's in it. It could be a pearl necklace. It could be family documents. If you're worried about safety, if you've only got 20 coins, you can hide it in the tea caddy or something. Yeah. But if you have a portfolio, you have to look after the security of it. So it has to be gold. And I would also counsel, and we're not there yet, certainly not in rural communities, but we could get there. I would have a good supply of food. I would have things like tinned food, corned beef, whatever meats you can have in cans. You have a store of those. Yeah. To get you through. We've got to understand that at the moment, governments and the oligarchs and the World Economic Forum are actually hell-bent on decreasing the population. Famine is a good way of doing that, and they're taking agricultural land out of production all the time with useless solar panels, wind turbines, ideology, which is happening now, of course, in Holland, where they're actually closing down the farms and not letting farmers go elsewhere to pursue their profession as farmers. So we know, and Bill Gates is the biggest landowner now in North America. We know this is happening, but the problem, of course, that we have is the population is still asleep. Most people are asleep. 80% of the population are fast asleep. 80% of the people submitted to experimental spike protein therapy in the last 3 years. Most people were happy to be locked down because they thought that was good. Most people thought social distancing was going to stop them get a respiratory infection. They thought a mask, a cloth, muslin mask was going to stop it. Most people are incredibly stupid. And one of the big problems that we have in Europe and North America is that until they become less stupid, this isn't going to go away. Having said that, though, they learn. It's a very fast learning curve. If you can't feed your family, they're taking your house away, and there's 25% inflation on food. You start learning pretty quick. Let's just hope it's not too late.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, so I mean, as you mentioned, the SME, you know, it's a sound backbone of a sound economy, and also, of course, a sound society. I mean, when we have seen Corona, basically all the lockdowns, you know, I mean, it really destroyed big parts of the small and mid-sized companies. You know, basically when the government jumps in saying you are not allowed to go out and to work, and you're not allowed to put food on the table, you have to lock down. Only the big ones were profiting from the whole situation. And now, of course, we have a banking crisis. At the same time, we can see, you know, that the too big to fails are profiting from it, that a lot of people basically are scared when it comes to deposits with small and mid-sized banks. So they're withdrawing it, or maybe, you know, even taking it out of the system. But at the end of the day, we also know that the small and mid-sized banks are financing, you know, it's the biggest financier of the small and mid-sized companies. So I think it's another additional attack against, you know, entrepreneurs and the sound backbone of our society at the end of the day. So I mean, and this in combination, I mean, we have seen a lot of strikes all over Europe, and we also have seen it in the UK with the NHS, for example. History is our witness. You know, politicians, they always use divide and conquer, fear and control. They try to separate, you know, or implement those kind of political identity Muppet Show groups to, you know, which creates a heavily toxic environment, dividing the people. So how is your assessment when it comes to the UK? You know, how toxic is the whole situation? How divided is are the people in the UK in general?
Well, of course, all of this is deliberate. The wealth of the world is owned by companies like BlackRock and Vanguard. And so fascism, and I don't use the term as in a pejorative sense like students do. They shout fascist without even understanding what the word means. Fascism is a political creed, which is popular in mainland Europe and has been popular by and by for over 100 years. So the thing is with fascism, it is a pact with the devil. It's a Faustian pact, if you will, between politicians and big business and the bureaucracy. So they actually want middle-sized businesses, small businesses to go out of production. They want to get rid of them because they can't control them. They're free spirits, entrepreneurial people, which they don't like. They want everybody working for the civil service or a FTSE 100 company or a Fortune 500, if you will. It's got to be big business, and they're all in league together. And this is one of the problems that we have. Now, what is interesting is it's how long this can happen in the United Kingdom, I don't know, because it's not the natural way of the Englishman.
Okay.
The English don't like that. They don't like big business. They don't like big government. So this push has been going on against the cultural nature of most British people. Not all, but most. And I think there will come a time when the Anglo-Saxon, the real Anglo-Saxon roots coming from before Magna Carta, if you will, the concept of the principles of English law, all these things will come pushing back. And people will then have to self-educate. Now, what's growing here, for example, is home education in the United Kingdom. People are taking their children out of schools.
Okay.
They don't want their children exposed to what they are being exposed to, fake science, anti-culture, anti-history, all these things, and sexual perversion and all this kind of thing. They want out of that, and they're taking their kids out of the system. So we've got to have a generation of properly educated. That's very difficult at the moment. When you have state, still people get most of their information from the television set. And the television set, of course, is owned by deep state. It's paid for by deep state. And your political correspondents at the BBC, Laura Cheeseburger, as I call her, she's on something like £300,000 a year. She's not going to rock the boat. She's not going to ask any difficult questions of the Prime Minister. They all piss in the same pot. And it's going to be, the thing is with the French and the French Revolution, if you go back to the French Revolution, they're a very volatile nation and they chopped everybody's heads off. It's not really the way of the British, but we were pushed too far by Charles I. We were pushed too far and we did chop his head off. And we had a rethink and changed it for a parliamentary democracy and a constitutional monarchy after a civil war, a real civil war, brother against brother, father against son. That's a civil war, not the Americans what call a civil war. The Americans don't understand what a civil war is. The North invaded the South and they think that's a civil war. That's not a civil war. That was a fight between the Union and the Confederacy, North and South. It wasn't brother against brother or brother against father. That's not a civil war. That was a good old-fashioned war before the North and South. We had a real civil war, as they did in Spain.
Okay.
The Spanish Civil War was a real civil war. We haven't been there for 400 years. I'm just wondering, and people had a principle, for example, the Royalists just down the road from me at York at Marston Moor. The Royalists fought to the last man, 300. It was a regiment, the Whitecoats they were called, a regiment of 3,000. Fought to the last man for principle.
Okay.
The Royalists fought for a principle. We had in the 15th, 16th, 17th centuries, we had clergymen or believers going to the stake to be burned at the stake for their religious beliefs. Catholics and Protestants, depending on who was in power, whether it was Bloody Mary or it came afterwards with Queen Elizabeth first. We don't, our Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, would never go to the stake for his faith. His faith is too weak. He's not really a true believer at all. He's part of the establishment. You know, he's really a bureaucrat with a very fancy gold hat. So these people are beyond the pale. So whether there'll be enough people like us who actually have some convictions, I don't know. I don't know. I suppose the whole thing will go a cycle, possibly not in my lifetime. Possibly not in my lifetime.
Okay. Yeah, the future will tell, that's for sure. I mean, it's to me, it always has been, this is a cultural revolution against Western civilization, because it really goes against, the principles of, it's individualism versus collectivism. And what we have witnessed over the last few years, I mean, it's really, it's going against, man is not a means to an end. We own our own body and mind. Private property needs to be respected and protected. Free speech, free debate, resonate. That's the only way how people can enlighten themselves. You should not be afraid to say something wrong, and because of that you will be put on the side or have to go to jail. I mean, this is all completely absurd. And even over here, when I see people, average people here in Switzerland, when I ask them, do you read the news? Do you listen to radio? I mean, they all tell me, listen, it's absurd. I cannot do it any longer. I cannot handle it any longer. And so, yeah. let's have a blink into the future. I mean, there has been a paper from the Bank of England. They are basically promoting the central banking digital coin, and I think they already have a roadmap out. They are saying that 2025, that's basically the year when the rollout should take place. Can you give your point of view when it comes to central banking digital coins? What are there advantages or are there only disadvantages, and what is the true meaning of CBDCs? Let's call it that way.
Well, it's a difficult one, really, because we've got digital money at the moment. You go into a bank, if you go into a bank and borrow money to buy a car, it's just electronically calculated by the clerk on the desk. So we have that already. Transactions are mainly digital in the main, 85% I think nowadays in the United Kingdom. Where's the difference in the centralized bank digital currency? Where's the difference? Now, the difference is it's programmable. That's the key difference. So it means the government, the banks are all in cahoots with each other, can tell you exactly what money you spent and where you spent it. And then, of course, your problem is your social credit system. So it's not going to be in the old days. If you went in when you were a student, well, and you sort of, in those days, for me, it was a check. We didn't have cards, we had a check. Your check bounced and you were on the wall of shame in the student pub, It was because you'd bounced a check on the gaffer for your beer. And of course, we've all been there when we were young men. But of course, the check bounces. So what will happen is people will go along with their credit card and they'll want to buy their holiday, their family holiday, to go to Alicante or somewhere from Britain. And it will bounce, and the travel agent will say, I'm sorry, you've already had a holiday this year. You took your family to Greece in May. You can't have another holiday. You've used up your carbon footprint. And that's what's going to happen. And you'll go into your butcher and you'll say, I'd like a joint of beef, or I'd like a leg of lamb. And they'll say, no, you can't have any more meat, just like it was in the war. In the war, you had a meat coupon. You could only have one sausage and a piece of brisket, in 1942 or 1943. And that's how it was. Those days will come again. And by that stage, people will begin to realize what's happened to them. But of course, it's the boiled frog. It's happened so slowly, they didn't realize. And then, of course, petrol, they'll go and they'll say, no, you've had your ration of petrol or diesel. You've had that for this year. So you can't drive your car. It's got to be public transport. And all these things, all this is coming down the road of its digital, centralized digital currency. It's control. It's about political control. Now, you will have heard, I'm sure, our mutual friend Alistair MacLeod give a view on this, and he's one of my great guru heroes when it comes to this side of life. He doesn't think it can happen, or he thinks it will fail. He thinks it will fail because it is not, at the end of the day, in the interests of banks or even big business who want to sell you that car, who want to sell you that holiday. So the idea of programmable is possibly there are just too many people with the levers of power who are hostile to the concept when they realize what the concept is.
Yeah.
From a political perspective, I would add to that is Alistair MacLeod's theory. My hypothesis, if you will, is, and I've learned this, I'm an old man now, and I've learned this over 70 years, absolutely everything the state does goes wrong. So they will bring it in, but it will go wrong. Nobody will use it. It will be a shambles because everything the state does is a shambles. And so they can talk about bringing it in. They'll settle it up. I mean, it'll go wrong. I mean, the biggest thing, we spent £7 billion on the national health system, computerized system. This was about 10 years ago, 15 years ago. We never talk about it now because it just went wrong and it was binned.
Yeah. Okay.
In York, the local government just bought 25 electric electric powered lorries. There's nowhere to plug them in. So they're sitting there rotting, £3 million worth. Everything politicians do goes wrong. And so do we need to worry about it? We keep a weather eye on it. We keep a weather eye on it.
Yeah.
But it'll go wrong just like everything else they do.
Absolutely. No, I think, and we also both know that central planning never worked. I mean, even their history is our witness. You know, it always ended in mass killings and impoverishment of the masses. So I think also this time, I mean, it's really more to put the people, you know, to fear the shit out of the people, to paralyze them so that they don't act, that they just accept this narrative which is promoted as the future. And so I think also it might be a distraction. Of course, you never know. But I think it's important to explain to people the concept and to give them a different view on these nice, you know, inventions by government who only come up with.
It's interesting. I had this argument with a Bitcoiner. I do quite a lot of interviews with Bitcoiners.
Yeah.
And of course, you and I are both sympathetic to the concept because it takes a medium of exchange away from government control. And I understand that. Although I'm a gold bug, but I understand people who are evangelistic Bitcoiners, and they are evangelistic. There's no other word for them. Yeah. Anyway. And some of the senior people who've interviewed me on the Bitcoin side have been extremely well read, very well educated, and I understand where they're coming from. But what the point that they can't quite get over when we discuss these sort of things, I can go into any major hotel in any capital city in the world. If I have a gold sovereign in my pocket, they will take it in exchange for a room and breakfast. And the concierge might have to go outside and exchange it, or they might have a little syndicate that's going privately somewhere. But I can spend that in Buenos Aires, Berlin, New York, Delhi, if I've got the nerve to smuggle a gold coin in. It will be acceptable. And it's, if you've got a pocket full of them, and even, I know it's a problem because it's quite big dimension. It's a sovereign now is nearly £400.
Yeah.
A sovereign is £400. So it's all right if you will have to settle, you will have to settle, for example, your window cleaner, for example, you will have to settle him every 6 months because that's too big a sum. But it's, if you're buying a pound of potatoes or 2 pounds of potatoes or something like that, you know, you have a problem with gold coins because they're actually worth too much for the simple reason that fiat currency has been degraded. But you will always be able to use that gold coin. It would be the same probably for a Krugerrand or whatever, but generally speaking, the sovereign, of course, it's an historical thing. And there's the picture of Her Majesty on it. Or nowadays, of course, that complete idiot King Charles, he's on it. But you'll always get a result. You'll always get a result with the gold sovereign. With Bitcoin, you have to unwind the Bitcoin position to put it through the system. And I say to Bitcoiners all the time, until I can buy a car or a refrigerator or a holiday with Bitcoin, it hasn't taken the place of a medium of exchange.
Yeah.
And the only response for them to that is that day will come, and I sincerely hope that it does. But we're not there yet.
Absolutely. No, I think, yeah. I mean, gold, of course, it's the hardest currency on the planet. Gold is money, anything else is credit. I think that's really what it is. It is all about. It's not a share, it's not a bond, whatever. It's money, and that's it. And of course, when it comes to, yeah, central bank, digital coin, Bitcoin, you know, I think I mean, I truly believe that the future will also be digital. But we know, you know, that decentralized structures are always more superior than centralized structures. So there, of course, that's the big difference between a central bank and digital coin and the Bitcoiners or the cryptocurrencies. I truly hope, you know, that all these crypto anarchists who basically invented, you know, in 2011, 2010, Bitcoin and the old spirit, of these guys, of those classic liberals, coding software with the aim to free the individual instead of enslaving the individual. I think these guys disappeared a bit over the last few years, but I hope they are coming back and will help to prepare, a decentralized, prosperous future. And I think, I have no doubts that there will be a lot of people going that direction. Maybe just, to finish, to wrap up the interview. I heard about Oxford, these 15-minute cities, of course, just to protect nature and the environment, of course, that's how it is promoted. To me, it's a bit more going the direction of a concentration camp, that it's more easy to lock down people and to control them better. So what is your take on those ideas when it comes to those 15 minutes green super duper villages?
Well, it's interesting. We've got Oxford, Canterbury, Bath, some quite famous English cities are going this direction. I can't remember the name of the city who's just rejected it. And of course, what's actually coming forward now is that they're being changed, taken down. They've got cameras that people are destroying the cameras. This is the one thing you could do something about.
Yeah.
This is one thing. This is easy. This is on your doorstep. All you need is a ladder, and you go out at 2 o'clock in the morning and you bash the thing to pieces. So you can deal with the cameras, and sooner or later you can stop that working. That may be, there's two little bits of revolution that the Englishman can do. He can do that if his city has imposed it, and he can stop paying the BBC. All right? Don't pay the BBC, it's 150, just don't pay. And that's really the ordinary citizen, the ordinary professional middle-class guy minding his own business can do both of those things. And I live in a small Georgian town in East Yorkshire, and we won't have that, and we haven't got that, and we're not going to have it. But let me assure you, I'm an old man now. I would be down there bashing a camera to bits with a hammer if they try it here, and I'm not alone.
I just saw that picture of you climbing up. I think that's a great ending. Thank you so much for the interview, Godfrey, as always. It was a big pleasure. Anything to add from your side?
Well, if we talk again, I'd like to talk again with you in about 6 or 7 weeks, because I'd like to talk on a completely separate, well, fundamentally separate subject, if you will, and that is the failure of Western media to expose the things that we've had from health, the warfare, and all these other things are completely the shield for us all in democracies is a free press. We do not have a free press anymore. We have state press that tells us what to think, how to think. All right. And I think that needs to be visited. And I want to call out some names. I want to name some names that people who have failed dismally to investigate these things. My website was saying that spike protein was a dangerous concept 3 years ago. And I have been saying for 18 months, this constant poking the bear, annoying Russia, getting at Russia all the time is a very dangerous game to play. And we ain't seen nothing yet, believe me. And we should be having the press flagging up this for ordinary people who don't have time or the inclination to do research for themselves. That is the point of an investigative journalist. He looks out for you, not for himself or the state. And so I thought that's something we might cover in 6 or 7 weeks.
Okay, sounds perfect. Looking forward to that talk.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for that interview.
Thank you as well, Godfrey.
As most of you know, my work is very heavily independently research-based, and I get my information from all over the world. It would help if you press the subscribe button and the little bell next to it, because the more subscribers I have, the more likely it is that international independent research institutes will share their material with me. It's most helpful, and then of course I automatically share it with you. So surprise, won't cost you anything. Thank you very much.